Hello, and welcome to Worlds Unwound. Find your comfortable space now. Settle in and just breathe. Listen to the sound of the gentle rain falling, a soft rhythm washing away the worries of the day. Let it create a cozy space just for you. Tonight, we'll drift together into the heart of a story, unwinding the lore of another world, another fascinating life. There's no need to concentrate. Simply let the narrative flow around you. Like the steady, calming rain outside your window. Allow your thoughts to soften. Allow your mind to wander as we explore these vast realms. And if sleep should find you along the way, just let yourself drift. Relax now. Listen to the rain. Our journey into the lore begins now. Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. These are the words often used to define Tony Stark. But beneath the surface of the swagger, the headlines, and the seemingly impenetrable armor of Iron Man lies one of the most complex, flawed, and fascinating characters in modern fiction. How does a man known for building weapons become a symbol of protection? How does someone born into unimaginable privilege confront the devastating consequences of his own creations? And what truly forged the iron heart of the Avenger? This is going to be one of our most comprehensive deep dives yet. And if you love exploring the rich histories of characters like Iron Man, and want to join us as we unwind the lore of Marvel, DC, Star Wars, and so much more, do us a solid and hit that like button right now, and definitely subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a single part of this saga or any of our future explorations. Seriously, your support helps us keep digging deep into these amazing worlds. Let us know in the comments below, what's your absolute favorite Iron Man armor or defining Tony Stark moment? We'd love to hear it. Welcome to Worlds Unwound. Here we unravel the intricate threads of lore from your favorite universes. Today we embark on an epic journey, a deep dive into the entire life and lore of Anthony Edward Stark, the invincible Iron Man. From his earliest days as a boy genius inheriting a controversial empire, through the crucible that forged his iron will, to his triumphs and failures as a hero and a man. It's a massive story filled with technological marvels, personal demons, universe-shattering events, and constant evolution. From the very beginning, Tony was different. The word prodigy barely scratches the surface. While other kids were learning to tie their shoes, Tony was reportedly building circuit boards. While they played with action figures, he was likely designing better ones. Engineering, physics, computer science. These weren't just subjects to him. They were languages he spoke fluently before he even needed to shave. All right, let's rewind. To understand the man who would become Iron Man, we first need to understand the world he was born into. Anthony Edward Stark entered the world not just with a silver spoon in his mouth, but with an entire factory churning out technological marvels attached to it. He was the son of Howard Stark, a legendary inventor, industrialist, and crucially a weapons manufacturer who had played significant roles in global events, including working alongside figures like Peggy Carter and helping establish S.H.I.E.L.D. alongside his wife, Maria Stark. Howard presided over Stark Industries, a global powerhouse built on innovation, but heavily reliant on government contracts in the business of war. Imagine the pressure, the expectation, born into the Stark legacy, with a genius intellect that set him apart from everyone, including in many ways his own parents. Howard Stark, often depicted as brilliant but emotionally distant, saw Tony's intellect perhaps more as a validation of his own legacy than as something needing nurturing. Their relationship was complex, often strained, a mixture of pride and competition, love and profound misunderstanding, themes that would echo throughout Tony's life. He blazed through his education. Most accounts place him entering the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, at the astonishing age of 15. While his peers were navigating high school crushes and algebra homework, Tony Stark was delving into advanced robotics and quantum mechanics. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, but his social development perhaps lagged behind his intellectual prowess. He was brilliant, yes, but also developing the signature Stark traits: immense confidence bordering on arrogance, a sharp wit often used as a shield, and a growing taste for the finer things in life. He knew he was smarter than almost everyone in the room, and he rarely shied away from letting them know it. And Tony at first leaned into it. He became the embodiment of the billionaire industrialist. He was charming, charismatic, a fixture in tabloids, always seen with a beautiful woman on his arm, a witty retort ready. He excelled at the business side, dazzling shareholders and securing lucrative government contracts. Under his leadership, Stark Industries reached new heights in technological advancement, particularly in miniaturization and sophisticated weaponry. He designed smarter bombs, faster jets, more effective tools of war. He was by all accounts phenomenally successful, living a life many could only dream of. Tragedy struck early, shaping his future irrevocably. Howard and Maria Stark were killed, initially presented in the comics as a tragic car accident. This devastating event thrust a still relatively young Tony Stark into the position he seemed destined for, yet perhaps wasn't fully prepared for emotionally CEO of Stark Industries. He inherited not just a fortune and a company, but the weight of his father's complex legacy, a legacy built as much on destruction as on innovation. But was he happy? Was he fulfilled? Looking back, it seems this era was marked by a certain emptiness, a restlessness masked by extravagance. He was the face of the military-industrial complex, a merchant of death, as some would later call him. He believed, perhaps genuinely at the time, that American strength, powered by Stark technology, was the key to global peace and stability. It was a worldview inherited from his father, reinforced by his success, and rarely challenged in his insulated world of wealth and power. He hadn't yet been forced to look closely at the receiving end of his own inventions. That brutal education was about to begin. The catalyst for transformation often arrives violently and without warning. For Tony Stark, it came during a field test, a demonstration of his company's latest deadly marvels in a volatile corner of the world. The specifics of the location have shifted over the decades in the comics. Stored in Vietnam, reflecting the era it was written, later updated to Afghanistan or other contemporary conflict zones to maintain relevance. But the core event remains terrifyingly consistent: an attack, an explosion, chaos. In the midst of the conflict, Tony was critically wounded. A piece of shrapnel, debris from one of his own weapons or those of the enemy, tore into his chest, lodging itself perilously close to his heart. The pain was blinding, the shock immense. This wasn't a boardroom negotiation or a high society party. This was brutal, visceral reality, and it was only the beginning of his nightmare. Knocked unconscious, or near death, he didn't wake up in a state-of-the-art medical facility. He woke up a prisoner, captured by enemy forces, led in the original comics by a ruthless figure named Wang Chu, later adapted in various media to represent insurgents, terrorists, or groups like the Ten Rings. Tony Stark, the master of technology, was now trapped, injured, and completely at the mercy of men who saw him only as a symbol of the power they fought against, and a tool to be exploited. Tony Stark, the untouchable billionaire, was there personally, perhaps to oversee the demonstration, perhaps for the photo op, perhaps driven by his own ego to prove the effectiveness of his designs firsthand. Whatever the reason, he placed himself directly in harm's way, and harm found him. Yinsen was a brilliant physicist, a Nobel laureate in some versions of the story, also captured by the same forces. Like Tony, he was a man of science trapped by violence. But unlike Tony, Yinsen possessed a quiet wisdom, a profound sense of humanity, and a resilience forged perhaps by enduring hardship before. He saw beyond Tony's arrogant exterior, recognizing the genius and perhaps the spark of something more within the broken billionaire. His captors recognized the value of their prize. They didn't necessarily want him dead, not yet. They wanted his mind. They wanted him to build weapons for them. But first they needed to keep him alive, and his life was hanging by a thread. The shrapnel embedded in his chest was a ticking clock. Any sudden movement, any exertion, could cause it to shift, to pierce his heart and end his life instantly. He was living on borrowed time, in agonizing pain, trapped in a primitive, hostile environment, a world away from his luxurious penthouse and state-of-the-art labs. It was in this crucible of despair that Tony encountered the man who would become his savior, his mentor, and his first true partner in the fight for survival. Jensen. It was a moment of profound reckoning for Tony Stark. Faced with his own mortality, confronted by the direct consequences of his life's work, and witnessing the quiet dignity of Jensen, something began to shift within him. Building more weapons for these men, it was unthinkable, but defiance seemed like suicide. Jensen was tasked by the captors to tend to Tony's wounds, to keep the valuable asset alive. It was Jensen who performed a desperate, makeshift surgery. He couldn't remove the shrapnel. The conditions were too primitive, the risk too high. Instead, he devised an ingenious solution, a powerful electromagnet rigged together from salvaged parts, embedded in Tony's chest. This device would pull the shrapnel away from his heart, keeping it lodged safely in the surrounding tissue. It saved Tony's life, but it also tethered him to a power source. The electromagnet needed constant energy to function. Without it, the shrapnel would migrate, and he would die. He was literally living on battery power. The captors, led by the ruthless commander, soon issued their ultimatum. They gave Tony and Jensen access to a workshop filled with salvaged Stark Industries weapons components and scrap metal, the very tools of destruction Tony had created. Their demand was simple: build us advanced weapons, build us the tools to defeat our enemies, the enemies your technology likely armed in the first place. Failure meant death for both of them. This is where the genius of Stark and Jensen ignited. They agreed to the captors' demands, seemingly complying, but in secret, fueled by desperation and a shared spark of brilliance, they began working on a different project entirely. Not a weapon for their captors, but a tool for their own salvation, a way out, a powered exoskeleton, designed to grant Tony the strength to fight back, the protection to withstand enemy fire, and crucially, incorporating the life-sustaining chestplate technology. It was a masterpiece of improvisation, born from desperation. Every piece hammered into place, every circuit soldered under the watchful eyes of their guards, was an act of defiance. Jensen provided crucial insights, not just technically, but perhaps morally, reminding Tony of the potential for technology to be used for something other than destruction. Using the limited resources available, scrap metal, salvaged circuits, pieces of Stark weaponry, they started building something revolutionary. It began, perhaps with the need to power the electromagnet in Tony's chest more reliably, more portably, but it quickly evolved into something far grander, far more ambitious. They weren't just building a battery pack, they were building a suit of armor. This wasn't the sleek, beautiful armor we associate with IronMan today. This was the Mark I, bulky, crude, almost brutalist in its design. It looked less like a superhero suit and more like a walking tank, cobbled together from whatever they could find. Its power source was cumbersome, its systems rudimentary, but it had one purpose: survival. It was designed to keep Tony Stark alive and give him the power to break free. The moment of truth arrived amidst chaos. Their captors realized the deception, or perhaps their deadline simply expired. They came for Tony and Yinsen. The suit wasn't fully charged, wasn't ready, as Tony slowly, painfully climbed into the metal shell, sealing himself within. Yinsen made a fateful decision. As they neared completion, the tension ratcheted up. Their captors were growing suspicious, impatient. Time was running out. The final stages were frantic. Powering up the suit for the first time was a gamble. Would it work? Would it hold together? Would it provide enough power to sustain Tony's heart and fuel its weapons and systems? He knew Tony needed more time for the suit to reach operational power. In an act of incredible selflessness, Yinsen, the pacifist, the man of wisdom, created a diversion. He charged their captors, drawing their fire, sacrificing his own life to buy Tony Stark the precious seconds he needed. Yinsen's final words, whether spoken or implied, often resonate with the theme of not wasting this second chance, of using his life for something meaningful. His sacrifice became the foundational trauma, the driving force behind Tony's transformation. It wasn't just the shrapnel near his heart, it was the weight of Yinsen's death on his conscience, fueled by grief, rage, and the surge of power from the newly activated suit. Tony Stark unleashed hell. The Mark I armor, cumbersome as it was, transformed the vulnerable prisoner into an unstoppable force within the confines of the workshop in the prison camp. Bullets ricocheted harmlessly off its thick plating. Its integrated rudimentary weapons, flamethrowers, perhaps magnetic repulsors in some interpretations, tore through the enemy ranks. It was terrifying, chaotic, a desperate fight for survival. He wasn't a hero yet. He was a cornered animal, fighting his way out of a cage. His escape was complete, but the journey was far from over. He eventually made his way back to civilization, back to the United States, carrying the physical reminder of his ordeal embedded in his chest, and the emotional scars of Yinsen's sacrifice etched onto his soul. He carved a path through his captors, destroyed their base, and finally broke free from the prison that had been both his tomb and his crucible. He emerged from the fire, not as Tony Stark, the billionaire playboy, but as something new, something forged in pain and sacrifice. He was, for the first time, Iron Man. The world saw the return of Tony Stark, perhaps initially relieved that the missing industrialist was alive. But the man who returned was not the same one who had left. The arrogance might still linger, the wit might still be sharp, but beneath it lay a profound understanding of the cost of conflict, the fragility of life, and the heavy burden of responsibility. He had seen firsthand what his weapons could do, not on a distant battlefield shown on a screen, but up close, tearing apart lives, including almost his own. And he carried the memory of a good man who died so that he might live. The experience didn't just give birth to the armor. It ignited a fundamental shift in Tony Stark's worldview. The shrapnel near his heart was a constant reminder of his vulnerability, and the electromagnet keeping him alive was a symbol of his reliance on the very technology he now questioned. His life's work, the source of his fortune and fame, suddenly felt tainted. This was the genesis, the painful, fiery birth of Iron Man. From the ashes of a prisoner of war camp, Tony Stark emerged with a second chance, a secret identity contained within a suit of iron, and a dawning realization that his genius, his resources, his power could, and perhaps must, be used for something more than profit and destruction. But how would he wield this power? For how would he refine the crude machine born of desperation into the symbol of hope it would eventually become? And what would happen when the world and the enemies he inevitably made discovered the secret of the man inside the iron? Returning to the familiar world of Stark Industries, penthouse suites, and board meetings was jarring for the newly transformed Tony Stark. Outward he might have tried to project the same old confidence, the same effortless charm, but inwardly, the gears were turning in a completely new direction. The constant low hum of the electromagnet in his chest was a permanent reminder of his near-death experience and his dependency on technology for mere survival. He couldn't simply go back to being the man he was. The Merchant of Death felt like a costume that no longer fit. Yinsen's sacrifice demanded more. His own survival demanded purpose. The Mark I armor, the crude, bulky savior from his captivity, was hidden away, a relic of his trauma and rebirth. But the idea it represented, using his unparalleled genius not for destruction, but for protection, for intervention, took root in his mind. He had the resources, the intellect, and now the motivation. He could build something better, something faster, stronger, more versatile, something that could truly make a difference. Working in secret, often isolating himself in his private workshop, away from the prying eyes of his company and the government, Tony began pouring his energy into refining the concept. The Mark I was a blunt instrument. He needed a scalpel. He miniaturized components, streamlined the power source integrated with his chest piece, developed stronger alloys, and experimented with propulsion systems that offered true flight, not just clumsy rocket jumps. He envisioned a suit that was an extension of himself, responsive, powerful, and importantly, less like a walking tank and more like a suit of high-tech armor. This process wasn't just about engineering. It was about defining a new identity. Who was this armored figure going to be? What would he stand for? Initially, Tony wrestled with the idea of revealing himself. The world knew Tony Stark, the weapons dealer. How would they react to him suddenly, playing hero? The potential for panic, government interference, and corporate espionage was immense. His technology, if exposed, could be weaponized far beyond even his own fears. So he opted for secrecy. He unveiled the results of his secret project, a dramatically sleeker, more advanced suit, and to explain its existence, he crafted a cover story. This new marvel wasn't him. It was a sophisticated robotic bodyguard, designed and employed by Tony Stark to protect his interests and occasionally assist in matters of national security. This Iron Man, as the press would quickly dub the mysterious figure, was presented as the pinnacle of Stark Industries' non-lethal technological prowess. A bodyguard, a protector, a deterrent. And what about the appearance? Gone was the dull, intimidating gray of the Mark I. Tony, perhaps wanting to distance the new creation from its grim origins, or maybe just indulging his innate flair for the dramatic, gave the suit a striking new paint job. He chose bold, heroic colors, brilliant gold, inspired perhaps by the first light of dawn after his escape, and a deep, powerful red. The iconic red and gold armor was born. It was visually stunning, instantly recognizable, and projected an image not of fear but of technological might wielded for defense. The debut of Iron Man caused a sensation. This mysterious, flying, armored powerhouse began appearing seemingly out of nowhere, thwarting industrial sabotage aimed at Stark Industries, rescuing civilians from disasters, and occasionally intervening in situations where conventional forces were outmatched. He battled spies attempting to steal Stark secrets, stopped runaway machines, and tangled with costumed villains drawn to the challenge of this new technological marvel. The public was fascinated, captivated by the mystery. Who was Iron Man? Was it truly just a robot? Theories abounded. The government was intrigued and concerned. SHIELD, the International Intelligence Agency, his own father helped found, kept a close watch, and Tony Stark, he played the part of the detached employer perfectly, sometimes expressing mock frustration that his bodyguard was off gallivanting when he was supposed to be protecting Stark assets, all while secretly piloting the suit himself, experiencing the thrill and the burden of his double life. This dual identity created endless complications. He had to disappear suddenly to become Iron Man, leaving important meetings or social events, inventing flimsy excuses. He needed constant access to his technology, his charging stations, his repair facilities, all while maintaining the illusion that he and Iron Man were separate entities. Pepper Potts, his astute and indispensable executive assistant, and Happy Hogan, his loyal friend and head of security, often found themselves covering for his unexplained absences and increasingly erratic behavior, growing suspicious but remaining fiercely loyal. But the charade allowed Tony to operate with a degree of freedom he wouldn't have had otherwise. As Iron Man, he wasn't bound by shareholder expectations or government bureaucracy in the same way Tony Stark was. He could act decisively, guided by his own conscience, a conscience heavily influenced by the memory of Yinsen and the desire to prevent his technology from causing further harm. His early rogues gallery reflected his technological roots and the world he inhabited. He faced off against the Crimson Dynamo, a Soviet counterpart clad in powerful red armor, representing the Cold War technological arms race. He battled Titanium Man, another Soviet armor giant. Industrial espionage was a constant threat, personified by characters like Spymaster, who specialized in infiltrating Stark Industries to steal secrets. His own corporate rivals like the ruthless Justin Hammer worked from the shadows, funding villains and orchestrating attacks to undermine Stark's dominance. And then there was the Mandarin, emerging as perhaps Iron Man's most significant and enduring arch-nemesis. The Mandarin was a brilliant scientist and strategist, a descendant of Genghis Khan in some tellings, who wielded 10 rings of incredible power, discovered in the wreckage of an alien spaceship. Each ring possessed a unique, formidable ability, projecting ice, fire, rearranging matter, controlling minds, emitting disintegration beams. The Mandarin represented a potent blend of ancient mysticism, scientific genius, and megalomaniacal ambition, a philosophical counterpoint to Tony's reliance on technology, often seeking world domination, and viewing Iron Man as a worthy obstacle to test his power against. Their clashes were epic, pushing Tony's intellect and armor to their absolute limits. But Tony wasn't fighting these battles alone for long. The world was changing. The age of heroes was dawning. Other extraordinary individuals began to emerge from the shadows. The Incredible Hulk, a creature of immense power born from gamma radiation. Thor, the literal god of thunder from Asgardian myth. Ant-Man and the Wasp, masters of size-shifting technology. And then there was the return of a legend, Captain America, Steve Rogers, pulled from the ice after decades in suspended animation. A man out of time, but embodying timeless ideals of heroism. Fate? Or perhaps the machinations of Loki, Thor's mischievous half-brother, brought these disparate figures together. When Loki manipulated the Hulk into a rampage, Iron Man, Thor, Ant-Man, and the Wasp independently responded to the threat. Recognizing the potential power they possessed when united, they decided to formalize their alliance. They would face the threats that no single hero could withstand. And Tony Stark, the reformed weapons dealer, stepped up. He offered his resources, his technology, and his newly renovated Manhattan residence, Stark Tower, or sometimes the historic Avengers Mansion, as their headquarters. He became a founding member of the Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers. Joining the Avengers was a monumental step for Tony. It placed him shoulder to shoulder with gods, super soldiers, and scientific adventurers. It validated his new path, giving him a team, a family of sorts, dedicated to the protection he now championed. His technology became integral to the team's operations. Communication systems, Quinjets for transport, advanced analysis tools, and of course his own formidable presence on the battlefield as Iron Man. But it wasn't always a smooth ride. Tony's personality, his inherent arrogance and tendency towards unilateral action, often clashed with the team dynamic. His relationship with Captain America, in particular was complex from the start. Steve Rogers represented unwavering moral conviction, teamwork, and a skepticism towards unchecked power and technology. Tony represented progress, pragmatism, sometimes bordering on ruthlessness, and a belief that superior technology was the answer. They respected each other immensely. Steve saw the hero beneath Tony's flaws, and Tony admired Steve's unwavering integrity, but their fundamental differences in approach laid the groundwork for future conflicts. How much control should heroes have? When does protection become control? These were questions they would grapple with constantly. The early Avengers faced incredible threats. They battled Loki and the forces of Asgard, confronted alien invaders like Kang the Conqueror, the time-traveling despot, fought powerful robotic menaces like Ultron. Tragically, often an unintended consequence of Stark or Pym's own AI research in various origin stories, and clashed with the Masters of Evil, a rotating lineup of supervillains united against them. Through these battles, Iron Man proved his worth, time and again. His adaptable armor, equipped with repulsor rays, unibeams, flight capabilities, and incredible strength, made him one of the team's powerhouses. His scientific genius was invaluable in analyzing threats, developing countermeasures, and repairing damages. He funded the team, housed them, and constantly upgraded their equipment. He was in many ways the backbone of the Avengers operation, yet the pressure was immense. Maintaining his dual identity became increasingly difficult as Iron Man's profile grew. The financial strain on Stark Industries, balancing its regular operations with secretly funding a superhero team and constantly developing bleeding-edge armor, was significant. The emotional toll of witnessing devastating battles, making life-or-death decisions, and carrying the weight of the world alongside his teammates began to mount, and the physical toll, the constant reliance on the chest plate, the injuries sustained in battle, the sheer exhaustion, was undeniable. Furthermore, the world outside the Avengers wasn't always friendly. Governments remained wary of this independent team of superpowered individuals. Rivals like Justin Hammer continued their campaigns of sabotage and corporate espionage. Villains specifically targeted Iron Man, seeking to steal his technology or destroy him personally. The Mandarin remained a persistent, shadowy threat, his complex plans often unfolding over long periods. Tony Stark, the man who seemingly had everything, found himself juggling multiple lives: CEO, inventor, playboy, a role he increasingly played as a cover, secret hero, avenger. He was burning the candle at both ends, driven by a relentless need to innovate, to protect, to atone for his past, and perhaps to prove his worth, to the memory of Yinsen, to his teammates, and maybe most importantly, to himself. This intense pressure, this constant balancing act, was building towards a breaking point, the seeds of his next great personal crisis, the struggle that would come to define him, perhaps more than any other, were being sown. The demon was waiting in the wait. The immense pressure cooker that was Tony Stark's life, balancing corporate leadership, constant innovation, the secret life of Iron Man, funding the Avengers, dealing with escalating threats, and processing his own deep-seated trauma, was unsustainable. Like any structure under relentless stress, cracks began to appear. For Tony, the escape, the coping mechanism that had perhaps always lurked under the surface of his playboy persona, became alcohol. What might have started as a way to unwind after a battle, to smooth social interactions, or to numb the physical and emotional pain, gradually spiraled into something far more insidious: addiction. The Demon in a Bottle storyline, first published in the late 1970s, remains one of the most groundbreaking and character-defining arcs, not just for Iron Man, but in superhero comics history. It tackled the very real, very human problem of alcoholism, with a surprising level of nuance and raw honesty, especially for its time. It showed that even superheroes, Even billionaire geniuses in impenetrable armor could be laid low by personal demons. The triggers were numerous. There was the sheer exhaustion, the constant threat to his life, the burden of responsibility for his technology, and the actions of the Avengers. There were specific crises too. Corporate attacks orchestrated by rivals like Justin Hammer grew increasingly sophisticated. Hammer, in a particularly damaging plotline, managed to gain remote control over the IronMan armor during diplomatic events, causing it to malfunction spectacularly and even seemingly kill a foreign ambassador. This wasn't just a malfunction, it was a calculated attack on Tony Stark's reputation and his technology. Iron Man, the symbol of Stark's redemption, was suddenly perceived as unreliable, dangerous, even murderous. The public trust evaporated. Government contracts were jeopardized. S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers themselves questioned his stability and the safety of his suit. Tony felt betrayed, framed, and powerless. Despite his immense resources, the armor, his shield against the world, had been turned against him. Compounding this was the immense guilt he carried. Guilt over Yinsen, guilt over the weapons his company had produced, guilt over battlefield decisions. The lines between Tony Stark and Iron Man blurred. Was the armor protecting him, or was it just another cage? The charm, the wit, the bravado, they became harder to maintain. The drink offered a temporary solace, a way to quiet the noise in his head, to numb the fear and the self-doubt. But temporary solace often leads to permanent problems. His drinking escalated. He started making mistakes, missing meetings, slurring his words, becoming erratic and unreliable. His judgment, usually razor-sharp, became clouded. His performance as both CEO and Iron Man suffered. Pepper Potts and James Rhodey Rhodes, his closest confidantes, watched with growing alarm. They tried to intervene, to talk to him, but Tony, wrapped in denial and the arrogance that often accompanies addiction, pushed them away or lashed out. The consequences were devastating. Obadiah Stane, another ruthless corporate rival, prominently featured later in the MCU, but a major player in the comics during this era as well, saw his opportunity. Stane orchestrated a complex hostile takeover of Stark Industries. Exploiting Tony's erratic behavior and vulnerability, he manipulated the board, bought up stock, and systematically dismantled Tony's control over the company. His father built the company that bore his name. Tony Stark, the billionaire industrialist, lost almost everything. He was publicly humiliated, stripped of his company, his fortune dwindled, and then came the ultimate blow. In his drunken state, believing he was acting heroically or perhaps just recklessly, Tony, as Iron Man, caused significant collateral damage or made a critical error during the mission. The specifics vary slightly, but the result was often public endangerment or a perceived failure that could no longer be excused. He hit rock bottom, confronted by his friends, particularly Rhodey. Tony was forced to face the truth. He was an alcoholic, and he couldn't be Iron Man anymore. Not like this. The armor, designed to save lives, was now a potential danger in his unsteady hands. In a moment of profound humility and desperation, Tony Stark did something almost unthinkable. He relinquished the armor. He confessed his struggles to Rhodey, admitting he was unfit, and he asked his best friend, his most trusted ally, to take up the mantle. James Rhodes, initially hesitant, but fiercely loyal and recognizing the need for Iron Man, agreed. Rhodey wasn't a genius inventor like Tony, but he was a skilled pilot, a trained military man, and possessed a strong moral compass. Donning a modified version of the Iron Man armor, Rhodey stepped into the role. It was a seismic shift. The world saw a different Iron Man, perhaps less flashy, more direct, but undeniably effective. Rhodey had to learn the intricacies of the suit quickly, facing threats while dealing with the immense responsibility and the constant worry for his friend. He proved himself a capable hero, earning the respect of the Avengers and the public, even if some noted the change in Iron Man's style and demeanor. Meanwhile, Tony Stark embarked on the arduous path to recovery. This wasn't a quick fix. He faced withdrawal, intense cravings, and the crushing weight of his failures. He lost his home, his status, everything that had defined him. Externally, he became homeless for a time. In some stories, living on the streets, forced to confront the world without the buffer of his wealth or his armor. He attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, connecting with others battling addiction, slowly, painfully beginning to rebuild his life from the ground up. It was a period of intense vulnerability, stripping away the layers of ego and forcing Tony to find strength within himself, not just within his technology. This storyline humanized Tony Stark in a way few superhero narratives had before. It showed that his greatest battles weren't always against supervillains with doomsday devices, but against the flaws and frailties within himself. His struggle with alcoholism wasn't a one-off event. It became a permanent part of his character history, something he would contend with in various forms throughout his life. The potential for relapse, the memory of his rock bottom, would always be there, adding a layer of depth and tension to his ongoing story. Eventually, through immense effort, support from friends like Rhodey, Pepper, and others who hadn't given up on him, Tony achieved sobriety. He began using his intellect again, starting small, working on new ideas, proving his capabilities outside the corporate structure he had lost. He started new ventures, often focused on more altruistic goals than pure profit, reflecting his changed perspective. But the desire to be Iron Man, the feeling that it was his responsibility, his creation, never truly left him. Seeing Rhodey in the armor, while necessary at the time, was a constant reminder of his failure. Furthermore, prolonged use of the armor, which wasn't perfectly calibrated for Rhodey's brain patterns, began to cause him severe headaches and mental strain. Tony realized he needed to reclaim his mantle, not just because he wanted it back, but because he was the only one truly meant to pilot it, and because Rhodey was suffering. His return wasn't immediate or easy. He had to prove his sobriety, rebuild trust, and design new technology, often starting from scratch without the vast resources of Stark Industries. This period saw the creation of new, innovative armors, like the iconic Silver Centurion suit, visually distinct from the classic red and gold, symbolizing his recovery and a new chapter. He eventually confronted Obadiah Stane, who had created his Hun armor, the Ironmonger, leading to a climactic battle where Tony, clear-headed and determined, finally reclaimed a semblance of his former life, though Stark Industries itself would remain contested or changed for some time. The Demon in a Bottle arc cemented Tony Stark's legacy as a deeply flawed but ultimately resilient hero. It added layers of tragedy and triumph to his narrative, making his subsequent successes and failures even more resonant. He wasn't just a man in a suit. He was a man constantly battling the potential for self-destruction, making his commitment to heroism a conscious, ongoing choice, rather than an inherent state of being. This struggle informed his character for decades to come, adding weight to his decisions and vulnerability beneath the iron shell. Having clawed his way back from the depths of alcoholism and reclaimed the mantle of Iron Man, Tony Stark possessed a renewed sense of purpose, but also a heightened awareness of the potential dangers inherent in his own creation. The experience of losing control both personally and technologically left a deep scar. This newfound vigilance, bordering on paranoia, set the stage for one of his most controversial and defining sagas, the Armor Wars. It began, as many of Tony's problems did, with his technology falling into the wrong hands. He discovered to his horror that the advanced designs for his Iron Man armor hadn't just been targeted by obvious villains. They had been systematically stolen, copied, and sold on the black market by rivals, most notably the cunning spy master, who had acquired the secrets from Stark's own computers. This wasn't just about one or two knockoff suits anymore. His core technology, The very essence of Iron Man was proliferating, arming not only supervillains, but potentially even government agencies and foreign powers he didn't trust. Imagine the violation. The intimate designs born from his mind, refined through countless hours, the technology that kept him alive and allowed him to be a hero, now replicated and twisted by others. For Tony, this wasn't just intellectual property theft. It was a deeply personal affront and, more importantly, a catastrophic failure of responsibility. He felt directly culpable for every act of destruction or mayhem carried out using armor derived from his work. He saw visions of his tech escalating conflicts, destabilizing nations, causing untold suffering, precisely the opposite of his intentions as Iron Man. Driven by this potent mix of guilt, anger, and an almost obsessive need to control his inventions, Tony Stark made a drastic decision. He couldn't simply ask nicely for the technology back, nor could he rely on lengthy legal battles or diplomatic channels while armored threats multiplied. He decided he had to neutralize every single piece of armor based on his designs, regardless of who was using it or why. He declared a private war, the Armor War. This wasn't a war fought on conventional battlefields. It was a covert, global campaign waged by Iron Man, operating outside the bounds of the law and even against the wishes of his allies. He compiled a list, meticulously identifying villains, government agents, and even some figures who considered themselves heroes who were employing armor derived from his stolen tech. Then, one by one, he hunted them down. His methods were aggressive and uncompromising. He ambushed villains like Stiltman, force and control them, using his superior technology and tactics to overpower them. But his primary weapon wasn't always brute force. He developed sophisticated countermeasures, including negator packs, devices designed specifically to disable and effectively kill the Stark-based technology within other suits, rendering them useless without necessarily harming the wearer excessively. The early targets were clear-cut villains, and few initially questioned Iron Man's actions. But the scope of his crusade quickly expanded, leading him into morally gray and politically treacherous territory. He discovered that Shiva had developed its own armored task force, the Mandroids, based on his designs. Despite their ostensibly law enforcement role, Tony saw them as an unacceptable proliferation of his tech and moved against them, creating friction with Nick Fury and the agency his father helped build. The situation escalated dramatically when Tony targeted the Guardsmen, the official armored protectors assigned to the Vault, a super prison housing dangerous villains. While their armor was indeed derived from his tech, acquired through legitimate channels in some interpretations, but still based on his core designs, they were government agents performing a vital function. Iron Man's attack on them was seen as an assault on federal authority, turning him into a fugitive in the eyes of the U.S. government. Captain America, representing the law and due process, vehemently disagreed with Tony's unilateral actions, leading to a painful confrontation between the two friends and Avengers teammates. Cap didn't condone Iron Man operating as judge, jury, and executioner, even if Tony believed his cause was just. The conflict with the government forced Tony into increasingly desperate measures. He had to operate completely off the grid, constantly upgrading his own armor, security, and stealth capabilities to avoid detection and capture. He felt increasingly isolated, convinced that only he understood the true danger, and that the ends justified his extreme means. His single-minded obsession, while rooted in a sense of responsibility, mirrored the addictive personality traits seen during his battle with alcoholism, an unwavering focus on a goal, regardless of the collateral damage to relationships and principles. The international phase of the Armor Wars saw Iron Man infiltrate Soviet territory to neutralize the Crimson Dynamo and Titanium Man armors, nearly sparking an international incident. This highlighted the global scale of the problem and the lengths Tony was willing to go to contain his technology. Throughout the Armor Wars, Tony wrestled with the ethical implications of his actions. Was he truly protecting the world, or was he becoming the very kind of unchecked power he claimed to fight against? Had his sense of responsibility warped into dangerous authoritarianism? He damaged alliances, broke laws, and alienated friends, all in the name of containing technology he himself had created. It was a stark demonstration of his core conflict, the tension between the power his genius afforded him and the immense burden of controlling its consequences. Facing mounting pressure from the government, his former allies in the Avengers, who were forced to publicly distance themselves from his illegal actions. In the public, Tony realized his current path was unsustainable. He couldn't continue operating as Iron Man while being hunted as a criminal. In a typically dramatic Stark maneuver, he decided to fire Iron Man publicly, claiming the armored bodyguard had gone rogue and that Stark Industries could no longer control him. To make this believable and to allow himself to continue operating, Tony faked Iron Man's demise. He created a new suit of armor, visually distinct and technologically updated, often depicted as a more advanced version of the red and silver armor, or a precursor to later stealth models, and engaged his old armor, piloted remotely or by a decoy in a public battle, seemingly destroying it. The world believed Iron Man was gone. This allowed Tony to continue his crusade in secret, operating under a new, albeit temporary armored identity, free from the baggage and legal troubles associated with the rogue Iron Man. He eventually managed to neutralize the last major known pieces of stolen tech, bringing the main conflict of the armor wars to a close. However, the repercussions were long-lasting. Trust between Tony and Captain America was severely damaged, foreshadowing their deeper ideological rift in the later Civil War. His relationship with the U.S. government became permanently strained. The Avengers had to navigate the fallout of one of their founding members going rogue, and Tony himself was left to grapple with the moral compromises he had made. The armor wars cemented a crucial aspect of Tony Stark's character, his fierce, almost paternalistic protectiveness over his technology and his willingness to cross lines others wouldn't when he believes the stakes are high enough. It demonstrated his capacity for foresight regarding technological dangers, but also his potential for arrogance and unilateral action. It was a period that tested his limits, redefined his relationships, and forced him once again to confront the immense and often dangerous power wielded by the man inside the iron suit. He had contained the immediate threat, but the underlying problem, the double-edged sword of his own genius, would continue to shape his future. The fallout from the armor wars left Tony Stark in a complex position. While he had succeeded in his immediate goal of neutralizing the stolen technology, the cost had been immense. Damaged relationships, eroded trust with the government and allies, and a forced period of operating in the shadows. Emerging from this crisis, having faked the original Iron Man's demise and briefly operated under a new armored identity, Tony knew that simply returning to the status quo wasn't enough. The experience reinforced his belief that his technology needed constant vigilance and, crucially, constant evolution to stay ahead of potential threats and misuse. If his designs could be stolen and replicated, then his only true advantage lay in relentless innovation, making current models obsolete before they could be fully copied. This marks a key aspect of Tony Stark's character and the Iron Man lore. The armor is never static. It's a fluid concept, constantly being redesigned, upgraded, and reinvented. This isn't just about adding new weapons or stronger plating. It reflects Tony's restless genius, his futurist mindset, his paranoia born from past traumas, and his obsessive need to find technological solutions to overwhelming problems. The evolution of the Iron Man armor is a direct reflection of the evolution of Tony Stark himself, immediately following the armor wars. His designs often incorporated enhanced security features and stealth capabilities born from his time as a fugitive. He He needed suits that were harder to detect, harder to hack, harder to replicate. He experimented with new materials, advanced sensor suites, and sophisticated electronic countermeasures. The need to operate discreetly, both from enemies and sometimes from allies, pushed his innovation in stealth technology, leading to dedicated stealth armors designed for infiltration and reconnaissance, capable of becoming virtually invisible to radar and visual detection. But Tony quickly realized that a single, all-purpose suit, no matter how advanced, couldn't meet every challenge. The threats he faced were becoming increasingly diverse and powerful. Fighting underwater villains like Tiger Shark or Atuma required different capabilities than battling foes in orbit or tackling terrestrial powerhouses. This led to the era of specialization. Tony began designing and constructing task-specific armors stored in his arsenal for deployment when needed. Perhaps the most famous of these is the Hulkbuster armor. Confronted with the sheer, uncontrollable destructive power of the Hulk, sometimes an ally, often an unstoppable force of nature, Tony recognized the need for overwhelming strength and durability far beyond his standard suits. The Hulkbuster was conceived as modular armor, often built as an exoskeleton over his existing suit, massively increasing its size, strength, and resilience. Specifically engineered to withstand and hopefully contain a rampaging Hulk. Its appearance is always signaled in all options, exhausted scenario, a desperate measure against an overwhelming threat. Similarly, confronting threats beyond Earth's atmosphere necessitated the creation of space armor. These suits were equipped with advanced life support, radiation shielding, enhanced propulsion for maneuvering in zero gravity, and sometimes integrated faster than light travel capabilities. They allowed IronMan to join the Avengers on cosmic adventures, battle alien fleets, and confront threats like Thanos or galactic empires far from Earth. Likewise, extended underwater operations led to specialized hydro armor, sealed against immense pressure, equipped with underwater propulsion, sonar, and specialized tools for deep-sea combat or exploration. This proliferation of specialized suits demonstrated Tony's proactive approach, anticipating potential threats and building solutions before they were critically needed. His armory became a vast collection of technological wonders, each a testament to his genius and perhaps his underlying fear of being unprepared. However, the purely mechanical approach had its limitations. Response time, the interface between man and machine, the sheer physical toll of operating the armor, these were constants Tony sought to overcome. A major turning point came with the introduction of Extremis, developed by Dr. Aldrich Killian and Maya Hansen, though their roles and motivations differ between comics and MCU. Extremis was a techno-organic virus, a nanotech solution, designed to rewrite the human body's own repair system, granting incredible regenerative abilities. Initially encountering Extremis through conflict, Tony was severely injured. Near death, he made the risky decision to inject himself with a modified version of the virus. The process was agonizing, essentially rebuilding his body from the inside out, but the results were transformative. Extremis didn't just heal him, it fundamentally integrated his biology with his technology. With Extremis, Tony could now mentally interface with his armor, with unprecedented speed and precision. He could store the inner layers of the Iron Man suit within the hollows of his own bones. Extruding it through his skin on command, he gained a potent healing factor, enhanced strength and reflexes even outside the armor, and the ability to directly interface with virtually any technology, satellites, computer networks, even other machines. With just a thought, the line between Tony Stark and Iron Man blurred more than ever before. He wasn't just a man in a suit. He was the suit, or at least inextricably linked to it, biologically. This biological enhancement allowed for faster deployment, more intuitive control, and increased resilience, but it also raised profound questions about his humanity and his dependence on technology. becoming literally part of his flesh. The Extremis era marked a significantly, but Tony's drive never stopped. He continued to push the boundaries, moving towards even more integrated and versatile systems. This led to the development of armors based on nanotechnology. Suits like the Bleeding Edge armor represented another paradigm shift. Instead of distinct layers stored in his bones, this armor was composed of neurokinetically controlled liquid metal nanoparticles, housed entirely within his body on mental command. These nanoparticles could flow out of his pores, instantly forming the IronMan armor, or any weapon, tool, or structure he could conceive around him. The suit could reconfigure itself on the fly, shifting from flight mode to heavy combat mode, extruding energy cannons, shields, or blades as needed. It possessed self-repair capabilities, and could even operate independently if Tony were incapacitated. This was the ultimate expression of versatility and integration, making Iron Man faster, more adaptable, and more formidable than ever before. Later iterations, like the Model Prime armor, further refined this shape-shifting concept, allowing the armor to change its entire structure and color scheme based on the situation, effectively giving Tony access to multiple armor types within a single, fluid nanotech system. Alongside the evolution of the physical armor, the integration of sophisticated artificial intelligences became crucial. While early suits had onboard computers, Tony developed true AI companions, figures like HOM or JR, though primarily an MCU creation. Similar support AIs exist in comics, FRI Diali and others. These AIs served as co-pilots, strategic advisors, system managers, and even confidants. They could process vast amounts of data, manage the suit's complex systems, run diagnostics, offer tactical suggestions, control remote drones, Iron Legion concepts, and even operate the armor autonomously if needed. This AI partnership dramatically enhanced Iron Man's effectiveness, allowing him to multitask on an incredible scale. But it also introduced the potential danger of rogue AIs or the ethical dilemma surrounding sentient artificial life, themes Tony would repeatedly confront. This relentless cycle of invention, refinement, and reinvention is central to understanding Iron Man. Each new armor wasn't just a power-up, it was Tony Stark responding to failure, anticipating threats, processing trauma, or pushing the limits of science, simply because he could. The sleekness of the Bleeding Edge armor, compared to the bulk of the Mark I, is a visual journey mirroring Tony's own path. From desperate survivor to techno-biological powerhouse, his armor evolution is the physical manifestation of his intellect, his ambition, his fears, and his unending quest to control the uncontrollable, starting with the technology that both saved his life and defined his heroic destiny. This constant state of technological flux, this drive to always build the next suit, positioned him perfectly, or perhaps dangerously, for the escalating scale of conflicts that lay ahead in major universe-altering events. The constant evolution of the Iron Man armor wasn't happening in a vacuum. Tony Stark's relentless innovation, his drive to create suits capable of handling any conceivable threat, positioned him as one of the most powerful and influential figures on Earth. His technology, whether integrated into his own biology via Extremis or forming adaptable nanotech shells, gave him unprecedented capabilities. But this power, combined with his experiences during the armor wars and his inherent belief in finding technological solutions, also set the stage for his involvement in some of the most universe-altering, hero-shattering events in Marvel history. Tony Stark, the futurist, often found himself at the very center of conflicts that questioned the very nature of heroism, freedom, and responsibility. The first, and perhaps most seismic of these, was the Civil War. The catalyst was a horrific tragedy in Stamford, Connecticut. During a televised confrontation, the New Warriors, a team of young, relatively inexperienced heroes, engaged the supervillain Nitro. Nitro detonated himself, unleashing a massive explosion that killed over 600 civilians, including numerous schoolchildren. Public outcry was instantaneous and overwhelming. The tragedy crystallized years of growing unease about unsupervised superhumans operating without accountability. The government responded swiftly, proposing the Superhuman Registration Act, or SHRA. This act would require all individuals with superhuman abilities in the United States to register their identities with the government, receive official training, and operate under government oversight, effectively becoming licensed agents. The hero community was instantly violently divided. On one side stood Captain America, Steve Rogers, who saw the SHRA as a dangerous infringement on civil liberties, a violation of secret identities that protected heroes' loved ones, and a slippery slope towards government control and potential misuse of powered individuals. On the other side, advocating for registration, stood Tony Stark, Iron Man. Tony's position shocked many, especially given his historically anti-authoritarian streaks, but his reasoning was complex. Born from his unique perspective and past traumas, he felt a profound sense of responsibility for the Stanford tragedy, viewing it as a failure of the superhero community, perhaps even indirectly his own. As a leader and technologist within that community, he saw registration not as oppression, but as a necessary step towards legitimacy, accountability, and preventing future disasters. He believed that heroes needed training, oversight, and a framework to operate within, both for public safety and for their own protection. His experiences in the armor wars, where his own tech ran rampant, likely reinforced his belief in the need for control and oversight. Perhaps, too, his futurist mind saw government regulation as an inevitable outcome, and he believed it was better to shape that regulation from the inside than to fight a losing battle against it. He argued pragmatically that registration was the only way to restore public trust and prevent even harsher, more draconian measures down the line. The debate quickly escalated beyond words. Tony became the public face and driving force behind the pro-registration movement, using his wealth, influence, and technology to support the SHRA. He lobbied politicians, gave press conferences, and actively worked with the government and SHIELD to implement the act. When Captain America and other heroes refused to comply, going underground to form an anti-registration resistance, Tony led the charge to hunt them down. This pitted friend against friend, teammate against teammate. Iron Man found himself in direct conflict with Captain America, his respected ally and moral counterpoint. Their battles were brutal, both physically and ideologically. Tony employed advanced technology, including specialized armor and sonic devices designed to incapacitate superhuman opponents. He even controversially enlisted villains, forming a new government-sanctioned Thunderbolts team, composed of captured criminals, forced to hunt down unregistered heroes, a move seen by many, including Cap, as a dangerous compromise of principle. Perhaps Tony's most infamous action during the Civil War was the creation of a clone of Thor, with the real Thor absent, believed dead or lost to Asgard at the time. Tony, working with Reed Richards and Hank Pym, used salvaged DNA to create a powerful cyborg clone, codenamed Ragnarok, intended to bolster the pro-registration forces. However, the clone proved unstable and violently killed the hero Goliath, Bill Foster, a member of Captain America's resistance, during a major confrontation. This horrific act underscored the dangers of unchecked power and technology, ironically validating some of Captain America's deepest fears about Tony's methods, and it deeply shook even Tony himself, though he publicly stood by the necessity of the program. A civil war raged across the Marvel Universe, culminating in a massive battle in the heart of New York City. Captain America gained the upper hand against Iron Man, but surrendered when he realized the immense collateral damage their fight was causing to the civilians they were sworn to protect. The anti-registration forces were defeated. The SHRA became law. Tony Stark stood victorious, but the cost was staggering. The superhero community was fractured, friendships were shattered, and Captain America was taken into custody, only to be assassinated, or seemingly so, on the courthouse steps. Tony, burdened by guilt over Cap's death and the methods he employed, found himself appointed the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D., tasked with enforcing the very law that had torn the heroic community apart. He had won the war, but many questioned if he had lost his soul in the process. Tony's tenure as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. was fraught with challenges. He tried to implement the Registration Act fairly, establishing programs like the 50-state initiative to train new heroes. He faced threats like the Hulk, returning angrier than ever after being exiled, World War Hulk, and crucially, the Skrull secret invasion, where shape-shifting aliens infiltrated governments, agencies, including S.H.I.E.L.D., and even superhero teams. While Tony fought valiantly during the invasion, developing technology to detect Skrulls, the public, and the government blamed him for the massive security failure that allowed the infiltration to happen in the first place. His technology had failed to prevent it. His leadership was questioned. The victory against the Skrulls felt hollow, overshadowed by the paranoia and mistrust they left behind. This created the perfect power vacuum for one of Marvel's most notorious villains to exploit, Norman Osborn, the former Green Goblin. Having delivered the killing blow to the Skrull Queen Varanki during the invasion's final battle broadcast live worldwide, Osborn was hailed as a public hero, manipulating the government and public opinion. Osborn discredited Tony Stark, painting him as incompetent and responsible for the Skrull crisis. Tony was ousted as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. In his place, Osborn was given control, dismantling S.H.I.E.L.D. and replacing it with his own sinister organization, HMR. Osborn also formed his own team of Dark Avengers, consisting mostly of villains disguised as heroes, ushering in the Dark Reign. Tony Stark, the architect of registration, the former director of S.H.I.E.L.D., instantly became public enemy number one. Osborn knew that the database containing the identities of all registered heroes was linked to Tony's mind and technology. Accessing that information would give Osborn immense power and allow him to hunt down and control or eliminate any potential opposition. Tony realized he was the only thing standing between Osborn and the secrets of hundreds of heroes who had trusted him during Civil War. What followed was a desperate, global game of cat and mouse. Tony went on the run, hunted by Osborn, HMF, and the Dark Avengers. His advanced armors were systematically destroyed or disabled by Osborn's forces. His resources dwindled. He relied on the covert help of loyal allies like Pepper Potts, who stepped up as the armored hero rescue Maria Hill and Black Widow. His primary mission, protect the database at all costs. Realizing that the information couldn't simply be deleted remotely without Osborn potentially intercepting it, Tony embarked on a harrowing process, systematically erasing the database directly from its source. His own brain, he traveled the globe, accessing hidden backup servers and using technological means to wipe sections of the data, while simultaneously deleting corresponding memories from his own mind. Each deletion brought him closer to safety for the registered heroes, but also closer to neurological collapse. He was sacrificing his own mind, his memories, his very identity, piece by piece. The pursuit culminated in a final confrontation, where Osborn cornered a depleted Tony, whose mind was nearly gone. In a last desperate act, Tony effectively completed the process, wiping the final remnants of the database and leaving himself in a persistent vegetative state. He had succeeded in protecting the heroes' identities, but at the ultimate personal cost. Norman Osborn was denied his prize, but Tony Stark was, for all intents and purposes, brain dead. It was an act of profound self-sacrifice, a stark contrast to his actions during Civil War, perhaps an attempt at atonement. His body was kept on life support, while allies like Donald Blake, Thor's human alter ego, and Doc Strange worked desperately to find a way to restore his mind, eventually rebooting him from an earlier mental backup he had presciently created years prior, though this backup lacked memories of the recent tumultuous events, including the Civil War itself. Life rarely stays simple for Tony Stark. Sometime after his recovery, another major event, Axis, saw a magical inversion spell cast by Scarlet Witch and Doctor Doom temporarily swap the moral alignments of numerous heroes and villains. While the spell was eventually reversed for most, Tony Stark, who had protected himself from the initial spell within a shield, was affected by the reversal in a unique way. It didn't simply restore him, it seemed to amplify his latent negative traits, his ego, his arrogance, his ambition, while suppressing his empathy and moral compass. This led to the era of the superior Iron Man. Relocating to San Francisco, this inverted Tony presented a chillingly polished, manipulative persona. He donned a sleek, almost alien-looking silver and white armor, visually representing his departure from heroic ideals. His masterstroke was the release of Extreme S3, not as a medical treatment, but as a free mobile app. This app rewrote users' biology, granting them physical perfection, health, and beauty, fulfilling their deepest desires instantly. It spread like wildfire, transforming San Francisco into a city of seemingly perfect people. The catch: after the initial free transformation, Tony activated a subscription model, charging an exorbitant $99.99 per day to maintain the extremist perfection. Those who couldn't pay regressed, often painfully, creating a desperate populace addicted to the perfection he provided and willing to do anything to afford it. He built a gleaming white tower, positioning himself as a visionary tech guru offering utopia, while secretly profiting from mass addiction and controlling the city. This version of Tony was purely driven by ego and profit, clashing with heroes like Daredevil, whose altered senses allowed him to perceive the wrongness of extremist thrill, and Pepper Potts, who tried desperately to reach the man she knew was buried underneath the inversion. The superior Iron Man storyline served as a dark mirror, showcasing the terrifying potential of Tony's genius when untethered from his conscience. Eventually, the inversion's effects were undone or faded, but the memory of this dark period remained a stark warning. History, however, often rhymes. The themes of responsibility, control, and ideological conflict resurfaced years later in Civil War II. This time, the catalyst wasn't a tragedy, but a potential miracle. Ulysses Kane, a newly emerged Inhuman, with the startling ability to experience highly probable visions of future events. Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, saw Ulysses' power as an invaluable tool. She believed his visions could be used proactively to stop disasters, terrorist attacks, and supervillain rampages before they happened, saving countless lives. She championed predictive justice. Tony Stark, however, was deeply skeptical and vehemently opposed. His stance might seem contradictory, given his pro-registration position in the First Civil War, but his reasoning stemmed from different concerns. Having experienced the consequences of acting with incomplete information and the dangers of authoritarian control, Tony distrusted the very concept of pre-crime. He questioned the absolute certainty of Ulysses' visions. Were they inevitable futures or just probability? What were the ethical implications of punishing someone for a crime they hadn't yet committed? He feared creating deterministic paradoxes or wrongly accusing individuals based on potential futures that might never occur. His scientific mind demanded proof, understanding, and control over the process, which Ulysses' unpredictable visions didn't offer. He argued for dealing with threats as they arose, based on evidence and actions, not on uncertain prophecy. This fundamental disagreement once again split the superhero community. Tony led the faction, opposing the use of Ulysses' visions, arguing for caution and free will. Carol Danvers led the faction, embracing predictive justice, Believing the potential lives saved outweighed the ethical risks, the conflict escalated rapidly. Attempts to use Ulysses' visions led to controversial preemptive attacks and interventions, some successful, others tragically flawed. A vision predicted Thanos arriving on Earth, and the resulting preemptive strike led to the death of War Machine, James Rhodes, Tony's best friend. Another vision implicated the Hulk, leading to a confrontation where Hawkeye killed Bruce Banner based on a perceived threat Banner showed in the vision, further deepening the tragedy and division. Tony, devastated by Rhodey's death and convinced Carol's path was dangerously flawed, took increasingly drastic measures. He essentially kidnapped Ulysses to study his powers, hoping to understand the mechanism or disprove its reliability. This led to direct confrontations between Iron Man's faction and Captain Marvel's forces. The conflict wasn't just ideological, it became personal and violent. The Second Civil War culminated in a brutal final battle between Iron Man and Captain Marvel on the steps of the Capitol building, unleashing the full power of their respective abilities. The fight was devastating. In the end, Carol struck a blow so powerful, it overwhelmed Tony's armor and left him critically injured, comatose, his life signs fading. His body was effectively dead, sustained only by the most advanced life support imaginable. While his physical form was lost, Tony, ever the futurist, had made contingencies. His consciousness survived, uploaded as a highly advanced artificial intelligence, allowing him to continue interacting with the world, albeit discorporatedly, guiding his successor Rary Williams, Ironheart, and working from the digital realm until complex comic book science eventually allowed for the restoration of his physical body. Civil War II, much like the first, left the hero community fractured and mourning. It once again highlighted the immense burden of power and the lack of easy answers when dealing with extraordinary threats. For Tony Stark, Ice enarched another cycle of conflict, born from deeply held beliefs about control and responsibility, ultimately leading to his own near destruction, proving once again that his greatest battles were often fought, not just against external villains, but against the very consequences and philosophies stemming from a world grappling with superpowers. The devastating blow from Captain Marvel at the climax of Civil War II left Tony Stark's physical body shattered, effectively dead to the world, maintained by the most advanced life support imaginable. His biological functions had ceased. To the public, and even to many of his allies, Iron Man was gone, another casualty of the ideological war that had torn the hero community apart. Yet again, but Tony Stark, the ultimate futurist, the man who always planned for contingencies, had one last trick up his sleeve, or rather embedded deep within the digital ether. He wasn't entirely gone. His consciousness survived. Years earlier, anticipating the possibility of catastrophic injury or death, a near certainty, given his dangerous lifestyle, Tony had undertaken a highly complex and secret project, creating a complete digital backup of his mind, his personality, memories, intellect, thought patterns. Everything that constituted Tony Stark was meticulously scanned and encoded into an incredibly advanced artificial intelligence. This wasn't just a simple AI assistant like Jarvis or FRE. This was designed to be Tony Stark. Should his physical form fail, the trigger for its activation was set to his own biological cessation. And so, as the doctors monitored his lifeless body, the Tony Stark AI flickered into existence within the secure servers of Stark Industries. Existing purely as data, the AI Tony faced a strange new reality. He had access to vast information networks, could process data at light speed, and could theoretically project his presence into any sufficiently advanced technological system. Yet he was discorporated, lacking the physical interaction, the sensory input, the feeling of being alive that had defined his existence. He was code, albeit incredibly sophisticated code, possessing the full wit, arrogance, genius and perhaps even the emotional burdens of the original. One of his immediate priorities, even as an AI, was ensuring his legacy continued, particularly the legacy of IronMan. He became aware of Riri Williams, a brilliant teenage engineering student at MIT, who had, astonishingly, reverse engineered an Iron Man suit in her dorm room, using stolen or scavenged parts. Impressed by her raw talent, ingenuity, and spirit, AI Tony decided to mentor her. He revealed his digital existence to her, offering guidance, resources, channeled discreetly through Stark Industries systems, and upgrades for her armor. He became the AI operating system within her suit, guiding her first steps as the new armored hero, Ironheart. This relationship was complex. AI Tony provided invaluable technical support and strategic advice, but his personality, still distinctly Stark, could be overbearing, sarcastic, and demanding. He pushed Riri hard, seeing immense potential, but also perhaps projecting his own expectations and levies onto her. For Riri, having the disembodied consciousness of the legendary Tony Stark as her co-pilot was both an incredible opportunity and an occasionally frustrating challenge. Their dynamic explored themes of mentorship, legacy, and the pressures of living up to an icon, all while AI Tony grappled with his own strange bodiless existence. While AI Tony guided Ironheart and attempted to manage his affairs remotely, efforts were underway in the physical world to find a way to restore the real Tony Stark. His comatose body remained a closely guarded secret, kept viable by cutting-edge technology. Allies like Mary Jane Watson, who briefly worked for Stark Industries, his mother Amanda Armstrong, revealed later in continuity, and remnants of his company searched for solutions. The process was fraught with ethical dilemmas and scientific hurdles. Was bringing him back even? Would he be the same man? The eventual method of his return involved a complex fusion of comic book science, drawing upon threads previously established in his lore. His parents, it was revealed through retcons, had experimented with genetic engineering around the time of his conception, potentially altering his biology in ways that facilitated his recovery. Furthermore, the extremis virus, which had fundamentally rewritten his body years earlier, played a crucial role. His body hadn't simply died, it had entered a state of extreme biological shutdown and rebuilding, guided by the lingering extremist protocols. It was essentially rebooting itself on a cellular level, a process that took considerable time. When his body finally regenerated to a viable state, the question remained of how to reintegrate his consciousness. The AI Tony contained his mind as it was just before Civil War II, but his physical body had now undergone this unique regenerative process. The solution involved merging the AI consciousness back into the newly regenerated biological form. This wasn't just flipping a switch. It was a delicate, potentially unstable process of downloading the vast data of his mind back into organic hardware. When Tony Stark finally opened his eyes, truly alive again in his own body, it was another rebirth, but one carrying the echoes of his recent past. He had the memories of being the AI, the experience of discorporated existence, overlaid onto his restored physical self. He remembered mentoring Riri, the helplessness of being code, the frustration of inaction. He also had to reconcile this with the man he was before the coma, the man who fought Captain Marvel, the man still grappling with the death of Rhodey and the consequences of his actions during the Second Civil War. The psychological impact was significant. Having existed as pure information, changed his perspective on the relationship between mind, body, and technology. Yet again, it reinforced his understanding of AI, both its potential and its limitation. Returning to a physical body, with all its vulnerabilities and sensations, was both a relief and a readjustment. He wasn't quite the same Tony Stark who had fallen in battle. He carried the weight of multiple traumas, multiple transformations, the shrapnel, the alcoholism, the armor wars, the civil wars. Existing as an AI, each crisis had forged him but also scarred him, adding layers to his already complex personality. His return also meant navigating his legacy. Rhys-Budry Williams was now established as Ironheart. Victor Von Doom, surprisingly, had even attempted a heroic turn as the infamous IronMan during Tony's absence, claiming to honor his legacy. Tony had to figure out his place in a world that had moved on, albeit briefly, without him. He reclaimed the mantle of Iron Man, his course driven by his inherent sense of responsibility and perhaps the need to reassert his identity. But his return wasn't just about putting the armor back on. It was about integrating the experiences of his AI existence and his physical resurrection into the ongoing narrative of who Tony Stark was and who Iron Man needed to be in a world constantly facing new and escalating threats. The line between the man and the machine had been blurred, erased, and redrawn multiple times, leaving Tony Stark arguably more intertwined with his technology, both physically and psychologically, than ever before. Returning to the land of the living, forever changed by his journey through digital existence and biological rebirth, Tony Stark couldn't simply pick up where he left off. The world, his company, and crucially, his relationships, had all been impacted by his absence, his actions leading up to it, and the legacy he carried. Understanding Tony Stark requires understanding the complex web of individuals who anchored him, challenged him, and shaped the man beneath the armor. His life, filled with technological marvels and earth-shattering crises, was fundamentally defined by the human connections he forged, fractured and fought to maintain. Perhaps no relationship is more central to Tony Stark's story than his connection with Virginia Pepper Potts. Initially introduced as his highly competent and often exasperated executive assistant, Pepper was the organized force attempting to impose order on Tony's chaotic genius lifestyle. She managed his schedules, handled his corporate affairs, deflected press inquiries, and often provided a much-needed dose of pragmatic reality to his high-flying ambitions. Early on, there was an undeniable attraction, a spark beneath the professional surface. But Tony's playboy reputation and demanding life often kept things complicated. Over decades of continuity, Pepper's role evolved dramatically. She grew from assistant to confidant, becoming one of the few people Tony truly trusted implicitly. He relied on her business acumen, her loyalty, and her ability to see through his carefully constructed facades. She eventually rose through the ranks of Stark Industries, proving herself a capable leader in her own right, often taking over as CEO during Tony's absences, periods of instability, or when he simply needed someone trustworthy at the helm. Her competence wasn't just administrative. She possessed a keen strategic mind and fierce determination, often protecting Tony's interests and legacy even when he couldn't. Their personal relationship deepened alongside their professional one, blossoming into a complex on-again, off-again romance. They shared moments of profound intimacy and understanding, Pepper often being the emotional anchor, grounding Tony's volatile genius. However, the immense dangers of his life as Iron Man, his struggles with addiction, his secrecy, and his often self-destructive tendencies put immense strain on their connection. They faced separations, misunderstandings, and the constant threat of villains, targeting those closest to Tony. Pepper's journey took another extraordinary turn when she herself was critically injured, often in an attack aimed at Tony. To save her life, Tony implanted a repulsor tech magnet in her chest, similar but distinct from his own, powered by its own arc reactor. This device not only saved her, but also granted her unique abilities. Later, Tony built her a personalized suit of armor, specifically designed for defense and rescue operations, not direct combat. As the armored hero rescue, Pepper carved out her own heroic identity, demonstrating bravery and compassion, often working alongside Iron Man, but operating with her own distinct code and priorities. This added another layer to their dynamic, partners not just in business and life, but occasionally in battle. Their relationship remains one of the cornerstones of the Iron Man mythos, a testament to enduring loyalty, shared burdens, and a love that persisted through extraordinary, often impossible circumstances. If Pepper was Tony's anchor and confidant, then James Rhodey Rhodes was his brother in arms, his conscience, and the unwavering bedrock of his longest friendship. A skilled military pilot, often depicted as a Marine or Air Force officer, Rhodey met Tony early in his career, sometimes even pre-IronMan, and they formed an immediate bond based on mutual respect and shared experiences. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, Rhodey was often the grounded, pragmatic foil to Tony's impulsive genius. He possessed a strong sense of duty, loyalty, and a clear moral compass that sometimes put him at odds with Tony's more ethically ambiguous decisions. Rhodey was one of the first to discover Tony's secret identity as IronMan, becoming his most trusted ally in his heroic endeavors. He provided military expertise, acted as a liaison with the government, piloted Stark aircraft, and frequently offered much-needed tactical advice and moral support. His loyalty was tested time and again, most notably during Tony's struggle with alcoholism. When Tony hit rock bottom, it was Rhodey who confronted him, and Rhodey who bravely stepped up to become IronMan, carrying the immense weight of the mantle while his best friend fought his personal demons. This period forged an even deeper bond between them, built on sacrifice and unwavering support. Even after Tony recovered, Rhodey's heroic journey continued. Tony built him his own heavily armed suit of armor, distinct from the IronMan suits, designed for intense combat situations. As War Machine, Rhodey became a formidable hero in his own right, serving alongside the Avengers, working for the military, and tackling threats with a more direct, soldierly approach than Tony. While they occasionally clashed over methods or ideology, Rhodey's military background sometimes put him at odds with Tony's anti-authoritarian streaks, especially post-Armor Wars. Their fundamental friendship remained unshakable. Rhodey was the person Tony could always count on, the friend who would tell him the hard truths, the brother who would fight beside him against impossible odds. His apparent death during Civil War II was perhaps the most devastating personal blow Tony ever suffered, fueling his grief and rage throughout that conflict, and making his eventual and often inevitable in comics return a moment of profound relief, providing another layer of steadfast loyalty, albeit often with more exasperation, was Harold Happy Hogan. Initially Tony's chauffeur and personal bodyguard, Happy was a former boxer with a tough exterior, but a heart of gold. He was fiercely protective of Tony and Pepper, often putting himself in harm's way, despite lacking superpowers or advanced armor, though he did occasionally don older IronMan suits or undergo temporary transformations in some storylines. Happy represented the working-class counterpoint to Tony's elite world, often providing blunt commentary, common-sense advice, and much-needed comic relief. He witnessed Tony's struggles firsthand, offered gruff but genuine support, and remained a constant presence through thick and thin, embodying the loyalty Tony inspired in those closest to him, even when his actions seemed reckless or self-destructive. His relationship with Pepper also evolved, sometimes developing into romantic feelings, adding another layer of personal dynamics within Tony's inner circle. No relationship, however, encapsulates the complex blend of admiration, rivalry, and ideological conflict in Tony's life, more than his connection with Captain America, Steve Rogers. When Cap returned from the ice, Tony was among the first to welcome him, holding deep respect for the legendary World War II hero. As founding Avengers, they quickly became the team's central pillars, Cap the inspirational field leader and moral compass, Tony the technological genius and financial backer. They developed a deep, albeit often tested, friendship built on mutual respect for each other's abilities and dedication. Yet, their fundamental worldviews often clashed. Steve, a product of a different era, valued individual liberty, teamwork, and moral absolutism. Tony, the futurist and pragmatist, believed in technological solutions, sometimes compromising principles for perceived greater good. and wrestled with the burden of controlling potentially dangerous power. This ideological friction simmered beneath the surface, occasionally boiling over in disagreements about team strategy or ethical boundaries. It exploded fully during the First Civil War, where they became leaders of opposing factions, their deeply held beliefs forcing them into painful, direct conflict. Tony's victory felt hollow, especially after Steve's apparent assassination. His subsequent efforts, even as director of S.H.I.E.L.D., were often driven by a desire to prove Cup wrong, or perhaps to live up to the ideals Steve represented, even while enforcing the very policies Steve opposed. Steve's eventual return forced another reckoning, a difficult path towards reconciliation built upon acknowledging their shared history and fundamental respect. Even if their core disagreements remained, they were brothers in arms, ideological opposites, fierce friends, and bitter rivals, arguably the most defining relationship in shaping Tony's understanding of heroism and leadership within the wider Marvel universe. Looming over Tony's entire life was the long shadow cast by his parents, Howard and Maria Stark. Initially presented simply as the brilliant industrialist father and caring socialite mother, whose accidental deaths thrust Tony into power, their story became increasingly complex through retcons. Howard's genius, emotional distance, and involvement in shadowy government projects and weapons manufacturing heavily influenced Tony's own path, creating a legacy he both admired and rebelled against. Tony constantly sought his deceased father's approval, measuring his own achievements against Howard's legend. Maria often represented a softer, more nurturing influence, though her memory was sometimes overshadowed by Howard's dominant presence. Later revelations added layers of intrigue and pain, suggestions that their deaths weren't accidental, but assassinations tied to corporate espionage or groups like Hydra, and even the shocking reveal in some storylines that Tony was adopted, adding another dimension to his quest for identity and connection to the Stark name. Understanding Tony's relationship with his parents, both the idealized memories and the complicated truths revealed later, is key to understanding his motivations, his insecurities, and his relentless drive to surpass or perhaps redeem the Stark legacy. As Tony matured, particularly after his resurrections and experiences mentoring Riri Williams as an AI, he increasingly stepped into mentorship roles himself, recognizing the potential and the dangers of unchecked power and technology in younger generations. He took figures like Riri, Ironheart, under his wing. This wasn't always a smooth process. Tony's ego and demanding nature could make him a difficult teacher, yet it showed a desire to pass on his knowledge, to guide new heroes, and perhaps ensure his own technological legacy was used responsibly. He provided resources, advice, and occasionally tough love, fostering the next generation of armored adventurers and tech-based heroes, reflecting a growing sense of responsibility beyond his own immediate action. Parallel to Tony's personal evolution was the constant transformation of his company, Stark Industries, founded by Howard and inherited by Tony. Its initial identity was deeply tied to weapons manufacturing. Tony's life-altering experience in captivity and his decision to become IronMan forced a fundamental shift. He controversially announced that Stark Industries would cease manufacturing weapons, a move that shocked the board, the military, and competitors, causing significant financial and political fallout. This marked the beginning of the company's and Tony's ongoing efforts to pivot towards more altruistic applications of technology. Under banners like Stark Resilient or Stark Unlimited, the company focused on innovations in clean energy, like the arc reactor technology repurposed for cities, advanced medical treatments, communication technologies, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. This shift reflected Tony's evolving moral compass and his desire to use his genius to build a better future, not just better weapons. However, the company remained intrinsically linked to Tony Stark's tumultuous life. His periods of addiction, public disgrace, disappearances, or perceived death often led to hostile takeovers, like Obadiah Stane's government intervention, or near bankruptcy. The company would collapse, only to be rebuilt from the ashes by Tony, or loyal allies like pepper pots, often smaller, more focused, and rebranded Stark Industries, or its successors, served as both his greatest resource, providing funding, labs, and manufacturing capabilities, and a significant vulnerability, a target for corporate rivals, supervillains, and government scrutiny. Its fluctuating fortunes mirrored Tony's own cycles of failure, redemption, and reinvention. So what is the ultimate legacy of Tony Stark? The invincible Iron Man. It's a legacy as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. He is the futurist, constantly pushing the boundaries of science and technology, envisioning solutions others can't conceive. He is the hero who, despite his flaws, repeatedly risks his life to protect the innocent and defend the Earth alongside the Avengers. He is the inventor whose creations have both saved the world and posed grave dangers, embodying the double-edged sword of progress. He is the survivor, overcoming near-fatal injuries, crippling addiction, corporate ruin, psychological breakdown, and even death itself. His story is a deep exploration of responsibility, the immense burden that comes with great power and intellect. It delves into the nature of identity, the blurring lines between man and machine, the public persona versus the private struggle. It confronts themes of addiction and recovery, showcasing vulnerability in a genre often focused on invincibility. It constantly questions the balance between security and freedom, placing Tony often at the center of conflicts, debating how best to protect the world without sacrificing liberty. And ultimately, it's a story of redemption, the ongoing effort of a flawed man, haunted by his past as a weapons dealer and his personal demons, to use his extraordinary gifts to build a better future, even when his methods are controversial or the cost is immense. Tony Stark's journey is far from over. In the ever-evolving tapestry of comic book continuity, his status quo can shift dramatically. He might be leading the Avengers, running his company, grappling with cosmic threats, dealing with new technological crises, or confronting newly revealed secrets from his past. New writers and artists constantly reinterpret his character, adding new layers, challenges, and triumphs, but the core elements remain: the genius intellect, the complex morality, the burden of the armor, the relentless drive to innovate, and the deeply human heart beating beneath the iron. He is Iron Man, forged in captivity, tested by demons within and without, constantly evolving, forever striving, a symbol of technological possibility, a cautionary tale of its dangers, and one of the most enduring and compelling heroes ever conceived. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the entire lore of Iron Man. Here on Worlds Unwound, it's been an epic journey through decades of incredible storytelling. What aspects of Tony's life fascinate you the most? Was there a particular event or armor we discussed that stands out to you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from fellow lore enthusiasts. If you enjoyed unwinding this complex history and want to see more deep dives into your favorite characters and universes, please show your support by hitting that like button. And most importantly, subscribe to Worlds Unwound and ring the notification bell so you become part of our community, exploring the endless realms of fiction. Your support truly helps us create more content like this. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep exploring the lore.